I grew up in just outside of Baltimore City, and when I was around 12 or so, I've always been interested in history. And when I was around the age of 12, um, I was visiting the memorial to Edgar Allan Poe, and I found out that at the time that his original grave was very poorly marked. And so there was a big push to have a suitable monument to him at the cemetery. And so what happened was that there were a group of teachers, and they challenged the children all throughout Baltimore City to contribute cents to the this sort of almost like a GoFundMe page in today's vernacular. And so by collecting these cents, the program was called Pennies for Poe, and they were able to get a sufficient amount of money for a suitable monument for Edgar Allan Poe and the other family members who were buried there. And I just thought that that was really neat. And at that point, I really started to get involved in collecting coins.
How interesting. It goes back to early days for you, and that's wonderful. So let me welcome everyone. I am Lee Wright. I'm the founder of History Camp. And with me from Virginia is Carrie. We can't quite hear you.
All right, there we go. We had a here. Sorry about that. I'm Carrie Lund, the director of the Pursuit of History, and we are excited to have with us tonight Rod Gillis. Rod is the education director for the American Numismatic Association. He's been there since 2006, and before that, he was a public school teacher for 15 years. At the ANA, he creates videos and activities for the association's website, money.org. He teaches a course for educators called Coins in the Classroom, develops workshops and educational programs, and works with young numismatists to promote interest in coins among young people. His new book, Past Tense: History Through the Lens of American Coinage, is our topic of discussion tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Rod.
Thank you, Carrie, and a big kudos for you for being able to pronounce numismatist. Well done.
Well, Rod, thank you for joining us. In preparation for this, you'd identified a few time periods, and there's some specific pieces that you thought would help illustrate the basic point here of how a person can use coins to better understand history and the times in which they were minted. Do you want to take us through that, starting with 1792 and the half dime?
Sure. So when you take a look at the pages that you're going to look at tonight are sort of representative of the entire book. And so in this instance, I wanted to include the 1792 half dime because I thought that it would be particularly interesting to folks who are really into history, both world history and United States history. The story behind the 1792 dime is that in 1792, the government actually passed a coin act, the Coin Act of 1792. And what it did is it prepared for a United States mint, and that finding suitable coins that were going to be made at that time. Now the half dime is really in our language today is a half dime. And if you're not familiar with what a half dime is equivalent to today to our nickel. Coins that were 5 cents in value were made out of silver at that time with a small amount of copper, unlike today's 5-cent piece, which is primarily made out of nickel. So anyway, the story goes that the government had said, okay, we as a government need to start coming up with a monetary system, and we need to make coins available. And the story behind the 1792 half diem is that the silver used to make the coin is very strongly rumored to have been a part of the tableware of George and Martha, that they contributed that. And that would make sense because at the time, unlike today, the mint didn't have the metal to make plankets and eventually make coins. And so they depended on people to actually contribute the metal themselves. And then once the coins were made, the coins were shipped back to the contributors so that they could spend them. So in this instance, the coins were, and there were about 1,500 coins minted, I believe, about that number. And they supposedly were made out of the tableware of George and Martha. What's interesting is that they're quite rare, as you can imagine, and valuable. And it wasn't too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, that at a coin show, a collector found one in a dealer's junk box and paid next to nothing for it. And then eventually had it appraised and graded, and it was worth several thousands of dollars, even though it was in rather poor condition. So, you never know what's going to happen out there, but that's the story behind the half diem.
Got it. And let's talk a little bit about who decides what and perhaps who is depicted on a coin.
Yeah. So I can actually speak about that personally, and I can speak about that because there are basically 3 types of coins that the U.S. Mint is involved in. The one are called business strikes, which are coins that you and I use on a daily basis. There are also bullion coins. Bullion coins, an example of a bullion coin would be a silver eagle, which is an ounce of silver in a coin, but its denomination is $1. And of course, the ounce of silver is worth far more than the dollar, but the idea is that people buy them sort of as part of their investment portfolio. And every country, well, not every country, but many countries have their own example. There are French roosters, there are South African Krugerrands, but in the United States, the big one is the silver eagle. And the third category are commemorative coins. And commemorative coins commemorate either a specific person or a specific historical event. And back in 2010, I was taking a look. It was Memorial Day, and I was taking a look at old video footage. I love to look at old videos of historical events. And I happened to be looking at some World War I footage. And I was thinking to myself, I knew that there were commemorative coins that commemorated the veterans of the Second World War, of the Civil War, of the American Revolution. I knew that at the time in 2010, there was going to be a commemorative coin for the War of 1812. It hadn't come out yet, but I knew it was on its way. And just a whole slew of commemoratives to celebrate our brave veterans. But there was no coin for the First World War. And so I began an idea of trying to get a commemorative coin to commemorate the brave veterans of the First World War back in 2010. And to do that, I had to lobby Congress because bills have to be passed both in the House and in the Senate to agree to make a commemorative coin. And then eventually, like any other bill, it's signed by the president. And what in that bill, what you have to have is you have to have the exact size of the coin, the weight of the coin, the precious metal content. And then after all of that is done, then the idea it comes behind about what the design of the coin, what the coin is going to look like. And the Secretary of the Treasury is actually the person who makes the final decision. And he makes that final decision based on designs that are sent to him. He in turn talks with the mint to see what is feasible, what can happen. And then at that point, the Secretary of the Treasury makes the final decision. So in the case of the World War I Centennial coin, I started the Odyssey back in 2010. The legislation was finally signed into law in 2015. Took 5 years of my life to get that done. And then in 2018, the World War I Centennial commemorative coin was struck. So the point is, it takes a lot to get a design on a coin. It doesn't just happen by happenstance.
Well, Rod, getting something through Congress in 5 years, that right there might be an achievement unto itself. Not to mention something as substantial as a coin that's then minted by the U.S. Mint. So what was the design, and what role did you play in that?
So actually, the only role that I played in the design is that in the legislation, I stipulated that artists could submit their designs and that there would be a monetary prize for the winner, which really hadn't been done before that. And so that was really the only part that I had involved. And in the design of the coin, on the obverse, or the front or heads of the coin, there is a soldier, a United States soldier, and he's holding a rifle. And there is some barbed wire that is actually going across the rifle and his shoulder. And then on the reverse, there's a continuation of the barbed wire. And there are several poppies, which became really famous as a symbol for the bravery and the cause of soldiers during the First World War. And so you'll see poppies along with the barbed wire.
How interesting. Certainly strongly symbolic. I think visitors or viewers in the UK may be more familiar with the poppy.
Now, what is interesting about that particular coin to folks who love history is that my inspiration for that particular coin was a man named Frank Buckles. Frank Buckles was, once I started the idea of coming up with a coin, I decided to do some research to see if there were any individuals from the United States, veterans, who were still alive. And as a matter of fact, there was. And the gentleman's name was Frank Buckles. He lived in West Virginia. And at the time of when I came up with the idea, Frank was 110 years old. Frank served in the war at the age of 16. And he went over to France, and he was an ambulance driver. And what was interesting about Frank is that even though he was 110 years old, he was trying desperately to get Congress to allow a memorial on the United States Mall to be created to commemorate the soldiers who fought during the war. And that was a real inspiration for me. And even though I never had a chance to meet Frank, I did have a very nice conversation with Frank's daughter, Susan, and she was very pleased that we were able to finally come out with a coin that, that honored both Frank and all the soldiers who gave their last full measure.
That's great. That's great. Very interesting. Let's go to the next coin you selected, the 1838 seated Liberty quarter.
So I guess what I wanted to show behind on that particular page is that as you have talked about designs have gone through several progressions during the course of the years. And what's, I guess, particularly interesting about the Liberty seated quarter is Lady Liberty being seated is very reminiscent of Britannia on the back of the penny that they were minting at the time. And that's not abnormal. It's important to understand that the designs of United States coins, many of them are inspired by coins that were created a long time ago. For example, and let me see. So when we talk about ancient coins, for example, the Romans, who were very utilitarian, they were the ones who originally had leaders appear on their coins. So we were far from the first to be able to do that. And what's interesting is that a lot of people just assume that to be on a United States coin nowadays, you probably have to be a dead president. And that's just not the case. As a matter of fact, there have been examples of coins in commemorative coins in which people who are very much alive appear on coins. And probably the best example is a commemorative coin that was made in 1926. It's called the Sesquicentennial. And the Sesquicentennial has George Washington on the coin, but it also has Calvin Coolidge, who appears on the coin. And so when I show that coin to a lot of people, I say, I know you can recognize who it is on the in the front, and they say, oh yeah, that's George Washington. I say, okay, well, who is that behind him? And rarely is anyone able to say, oh, well, that's Calvin Coolidge. I mean, people just don't know Calvin very much, and the idea that he was very much alive when this coin was minted. Although I do think it's fair to say that it was often hard to tell if Calvin was alive. I spent a great deal of time in Vermont, and that's where Calvin was from. And he was known as Silent Cal, didn't like to talk a lot. And my favorite story about Calvin Coolidge is that there was supposedly a state dinner, and a presidential state dinner. And there was a woman sitting next to Calvin, and she was talking to him all night long. And he just wouldn't respond at all to her. Finally, at the very end of the evening, she said, Mr. President, I have to confess, I have a $50 bet that I can get you to say at least 3 words. Won't you help me? And he looked at her and he said, you lose.
That's a great story. We actually had Emily Schlaze on earlier this year, or late last year, talking about Coolidge, right? Her outstanding book on Coolidge. And I asked her about that story because I just love that too. Anyway, so that is a great story and an interesting example, as you said, of a coin where the individual is actually still very much alive. Anything else you want to talk about with respect to?
Yeah. So on this particular coin, the 1800, the reason it's called the Libecti half dime is because when the coin was minted, the top portion of the R did not show on the coin, and so it looks like a K. And so instead of it having the word liberty, it looks more like Libecti, and that's why it's called that. And the mint is a factory. That's what it is. And we have taken people on tours through the mint, and they're always disappointed because I think they think it's sort of like the money equivalent to Disney World, and that magical things happen there. And it doesn't. It's a loud, sort of dirty place, and it just so happens that their product that they produce are coins. And it's amazing when you consider the amount of coins that have been minted in our nation's history, the number of coins that have are error-free. It's just astounding. And the mint is better than that now, more so than ever. In 1800, you would find more errors just because of technological reasons. And what you see there, the Libecti half dime is an example of that.
So Rod, on that note about mints, where are the mints located today?
So there is a mint in West Point. There is a mint in Denver. The main mint is in Philadelphia. And there is also a mint in San Francisco. Now, the mint in San Francisco does not make business strikes. In other words, they don't make coins that are out for circulation. They make specialty coins, but and pretty much the same. Denver and Philadelphia are the mints that make principally business strikes. West Point and San Francisco make sort of specialty coins, although it wasn't always that way with San Francisco. The San Francisco Mint actually got its start with the idea of the movement west and the gold strikes, and the coinage was just not available on the West Coast. And so the San Francisco Mint got its start because of the need for coinage on the West Coast.
And along those lines, then, what was the genesis for the Denver Mint? That have anything to do with silver mining in the area?
Yes, that's correct. That the silver mining had a great role to play in the coins that were minted in Denver. Now, even though those are the mints that currently exist, there have been several mints here in the United States that were functioning but have since gone by the wayside. For example, there was a mint in New Orleans. There was a mint in Carson City, Nevada. So there are others too. So there are several mints that are out there that, for whatever reason, fell by the wayside. The Civil War had a large role in closing of some mints, but yeah, the principal ones now are Denver, Philadelphia, and San Francisco and West Point.
Got it. All right. So the next coin you selected to highlight was the 1936 Bridgeport half.
Yeah, that's a fun coin. And the reason that the 1936 Bridgeport $50 is a fun coin is because that coin was minted to celebrate the centennial of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Okay, and the proceeds from the sale of that coin was supposed to be used for the celebration of the centennial. Now, if you look at the coin carefully on the obverse, there's a very interesting figure. And the person on the obverse of that coin, and this is a legal coin, you could spend it if you wanted to, is P.T. Barnum. So P.T. Barnum actually appears on a United States coin. And at the time, he was a favorite son of Bridgeport. Now, I guess what's interesting is at the time that this particular coin was sold, it sold for around $3. So I'm sure P.T. Barnum believed that there was a sucker born every minute when you were paying $3 for a 50-cent coin. And I just think that's fascinating. You know, if you ask people, hey, P.T. Barnum appeared on a United States coin, right? You get this strange look and like, no, that could never be. But it did. It did happen. And there's the proof. So
Barnum was born in Connecticut, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he was considered a favorite son in Bridgeport. Mm-hmm.
So how is it that Bridgeport, of all of the cities large and small across the country, gets a coin to finance their celebration? Yeah.
Well, during this time period in the 1930s, there was really a plethora of commemorative coins that were being minted. And Bridgeport is certainly not the only one in sort of the lesser known commemorative coins that were made. There are several commemorative coins that were minted that people shake their heads and just say, why? Because it may not have historical significance, or the significance was very minor. There's a Cincinnati music $50 that has very, if no historical significance at all. There were coins that were minted in 1936 to commemorate events that were going to happen in 1937. And the whole idea behind the commemorative coins at that time was to try to come up with a way to finance the celebrations of various events that were happening all across the country. There are commemorative coins that celebrate events in Maine. There's a Vermont coin. And so you can, if you took a look at the commemorative coins, you will see that there are several subjects that you would scratch your head and say, why would they do that? As a matter of fact, if folks are interested, on our website, which is money.org, there is a page devoted to the commemorative coins that we've touched on tonight, and you can read about each of the commemorative coins that were made during the Classic Commemorative Coin series, and learn about how they first came to be and the story behind the subject for each of them. unfortunately, what happened was the silliness became so prevalent that finally Congress said, "Look, we've got to stop this. This is getting ridiculous." And so eventually, the commemorative coin series ended. It ended with a commemorative coin that celebrated George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington. And that coin was minted into the 1950s. The interesting thing about the subject matter behind the Washington Carver half dollar is that the money used for the Washington Carver half dollar was supposed to educate, and I'm quoting here, was to educate Negroes on the evils of communism.
And the proceeds went where?
That's it. It just went to organizations who that's what they did.
Got it.
And so, yeah, you can see it's an interesting thing about Booker T. Washington is he actually appeared on a commemorative coin of his own. So he is one of two African Americans who appear on two different United States coins. He appears on his the Booker T. Washington half dollar and the Washington Carver half dollar. And the other African American who appears on a two coins is Jackie Robinson. He appears on a commemorative dollar coin and a commemorative $5 coin.
How many commemorative coins, different types of commemorative coins, have been struck? Do you have any sense?
So the classic commemorative series had well over 30. In today's world, what the Congress has decided to do, and it's a good idea, is that they limit 2 subjects per year. So when they make a commemorative coin in today's world, they do it well in advance. The subjects come up well in advance because there's only 2 slots. And once those 2 slots are filled, that's it. No more commemorative coins can be issued for that particular year. So I think that goes a long way in preventing this pervasive silliness that happened during the 1930s.
Sure. Well, let me go back to the 30s though for one more question. So you described the multi-year odyssey that it took to get the commemorative coin. Was that the case back then when there were 30 being churned out?
No. At that time, very influential people had sway over senators and congressmen, and it was not nearly as stringent as it is today. That's not to say that some suggestions were tabled. There were, but if you were influential and knew people in government, there was a good chance that you could be successful.
I see. Very interesting. So let me ask about, I think perhaps the sole coin designer that I'm familiar with, Augustus St. Gaudens, whose home and studio is up here in New England. He was famous for his sculpture and so forth, and designed a couple of coins, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's famous for 2 coins in which he designed. The story is that Theodore Roosevelt decided that the nation's coinage was hideous, and that he wanted our coinage to emulate the high point of Greek culture. And so what he did is he commissioned Augustus St. Gaudens to come up with some designs, and he came up with a design for the eagle, which is a $10 coin, and he came up with a design for the double eagle, which is a $20 coin. Now, the $10 coin features Liberty in a sort of Indian headdress, and the $20, the double eagle, shows Lady Liberty sort of marching towards you, and you'll see the Capitol building in the background. So she's obviously marching towards you from Washington, D.C. And that coin, by many collectors, many numismatists, regard that design as the most beautiful design of United States American coinage. And when it was initially minted, it was minted in very high relief, which means that the design was very hard from the level, was very high from the level of the field of the coin. so much so that they were very hard to produce and they were not stackable. So what they had to do is they had to lower the relief in succeeding years to make sure that the coins were actually stackable. But yeah, Augustus St. Gaudens is principally known for the $20 gold piece that carries his name. Coin collectors always called it the St. Gaudens Double Eagle.
Oh, interesting. Folks may also know his Shaw Memorial here in Boston.
Right.
Commons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Rod, you've done a lot with educators and their charges, I guess, in helping people understand how they can use coins to learn more about history. What are some other examples that you think really help bring history alive and the coins that would be associated with those?
Yeah, so I think this is so important because, you know, we have a museum in Colorado Springs, the American Numismatic Association, and I try to dispel the theory that it's probably a place where there are dusty old coins that sit on dusty old shelves. That's not the way we approach coin collecting or numismatics. What we do is we want people to realize that coins are really primary historical documents that can tell a story about not only the year that the coin happened to be minted, or perhaps where they traveled. So let me give you a real quick example of what we mean by that. There's such a thing as called the 1913 Liberty Head nickel. Now, only 5 1913 Liberty Head nickels were minted. And so each of them are worth several millions of dollars to collectors. But if you think about it, let's move back a year to 1912. So there were 1912 Liberty Head nickels, and they made several hundreds of thousands, millions of those particular coins. So those coins to collectors aren't nearly as valuable as the 1913. But imagine for a moment that if you had a 1912 Liberty Head nickel in your hand, what are the possibilities? Well, you know, if you remember the 1912 election, for the only time that I can really think of, we had 3 very major candidates. You had Woodrow Wilson, you had Theodore Roosevelt, and you had William Howard Taft. Is there a possibility that one of them could have held that coin? Absolutely. The Titanic went down in 1912. Is there a possibility that the 1912 nickel that you have in your hand could at one point have been held by a survivor of the Titanic? Now, you know, are those things probable? No, but there's no one to say to you, I can absolutely prove that that coin was not with a Titanic survivor, or I can prove that that coin was never held by Theodore Roosevelt or whomever. So we like for coins to be able to tell the story about what was going on during the time that the coins were minted, and that was really my whole reason for the book, is to be able to have people. The book is really not about coins. I use the coins as a conduit, and the book is really about talking about the stories that the coins could tell from the years that they were minted.
Interesting. I think we have a link to your book, Rod, in the chat or the notes here that people will have access to. Is there one or two other examples you want to provide, and then we'll go to questions from viewers?
Oh, about a coin telling a story?
Indeed.
Well, I'll tell you. I think that in the introduction, Carrie mentioned that I was a public school teacher for many years, which is true. I taught U.S. history, and I can remember that there were several times when something catastrophic would happen in the world. And at the schools that I taught, very often they would have a coffee can or whatnot where kids could contribute money, and the money would go towards the Red Cross. Very similar to the sort of pennies for Poe story I mentioned earlier. And I happened to teach in a school where a lot of the children were not particularly well off. And, you know, a nickel or dime meant a considerable amount to them, although they were reluctant to give that nickel or dime or cent to the Red Cross, not necessarily because they needed it, but more so that they were ashamed that somebody might see them just put a nickel or dime in the Red Cross can. So in that instance, what I would do is I would bring from my collection, there's a wonderful coin called the Widow's Mite, which there's a parable where Jesus says that the widow has given all that her contribution meant more than any other because she has given all that she had. And what I would do is I would let the kids hold a widow's mite, and it would really blow their minds that, first of all, they were holding something that was thousands and thousands of years old, and that they were holding something that could be directly related to the story that I was telling them. And the interesting thing is, once they understood that, and they understood the parable, then they no longer felt ashamed, and were able to give, whatever limited resources they wanted to give to help the Red Cross.
It's a great story, Rod. That's really great. Good for you. All right. Well, let's see if Carrie can rejoin us. I know that we were having a few technical difficulties, but Carrie, if you can join us, I think we've got some questions. Here we go. Look at that. There you are.
Sure.
All right. So we have a viewer who would like to know if you have any ideas about how a small historical society or school could acquire historical coins in an affordable way, so that they could use them in teaching.
Boy, that's a great question. And the answer would be, my immediate off the top of my head answer would be, if they wanted to get in touch with me, we have several lessons that we teach educators in our Coins in the Classroom. And part of that is making sure that the teachers have access to coins that they can use in their class that are easy to get a hold of. So I understand where the questioner is coming from. And there really isn't a set answer I can give them, because it all depends on what it is that, what their museum is about, what subjects that they want to bring forth. And that would play a large role in what coins I could recommend. But if they wanted to get a hold of me, I'm more than happy to help bring them suggestions that they could use.
Okay.
And it's really easy to get a hold of me. My email address is Gillis, GILLIS, at money, MONEY.org, Gillis@money.org. And so it's very easy, and I'll be more than happy to help them. That's part of my job. That's part of what I do.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. So the Money Museum in Colorado Springs is open, and people can come and visit right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, just like any other museum, there was a period where we were closed for a little while due to the pandemic. But right now we're open Tuesdays through Saturdays, and we're open from 10:30 to 5. And every third Saturday, it's free, that you can come into it's free for children, but you can come into the museum and at no cost every third Saturday. And again, we try to dispel the rumor that people are going to come in and get bored out of their minds. We realize that there's probably that expectation. And so our exhibits really tell stories. As I think I mentioned when I talked about Frank Buckles, who was my inspiration, it was really neat for me because we took one of the coins, the World War I Centennial. Actually, it was a World War I Centennial coin that I minted at the mint during a celebration. And we had that there at the museum. And we were able to locate, through family members, Frank Buckles' cap that he wore during the First World War. So we were able to create and part of the exhibit was this World War I Centennial coin right next to Frank Buckles' cap. So that was really neat. And that's just an example of the types of things that we do. We have field trips. Kids come all the time. They enjoy themselves. We have docents who guide the adults and kids through the museum. The museum is not particularly large, you can pretty much view its entire content, everything that's on display, in a little over an hour. You can stay, if you want to, you can stay as long as you like and not get bored, but it's not something where there are endless hallways either.
Okay, perfect. All right, we have a viewer who would like to know about the 1943 steel Lincoln cent. Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. As a matter of fact, I can relate that to the book. So not only can I answer it, but I can relate it. So here's the story. There are probably more people call us about the 1943 steel cent than any other coin by a huge margin. And people call because I understand, it's something that looks really odd, and they probably don't run across one regularly. And they think, wow, this must be very rare, hence it must be very valuable. Okay. Well, the truth of the matter is that over 1 billion 1943 cents were minted. So they're not rare at all. The funny story that I have about that is when I went to our editor with the idea of this book, I already had in my mind what was going to be the last article that I wrote, because this book is really a compendium of articles that I wrote over a 10-year period. And when I suggested this monthly column for this, I already knew in my mind what was going to be the last column that I would write. And it was going to be the 1943 cent. And it's because that coin is the bane of my existence. And so I decided that when I wrote the column for the 1943 cent, that all of my friends were going to know that. And they knew that when they read that column, they knew that the column was coming to an end. So that's my story. The problem is that the story goes that when the Mint was initially making these 1943 cents, that there were a couple of blank, we call them planchets. There were a couple of planchets that were copper that were still in the minting press. And so they came out by mistake. And we estimate that probably with all the mints involved, all three mints involved, San Francisco, Denver, and Philadelphia, that there were probably about 40 copper 1943 cents. And there are advertisements all over the place where dealers will pay $10,000 for a 1943 cent. What they don't tell you is it's not the steel cent that they want, it's the copper cent. And because people see these steel cents and they say, wow, that's different, they naturally assume that this $10,000 payday is for the 1943 steel cents and not the 1943 copper cents. And then to wrap it up in a nice little bow, there are people who have taken a 1943 steel cent and have layered it with a thin layer of copper to pass them off as 1943 copper cents. How can you tell the difference? It's very easy. 1943 steel cents are attracted to a magnet, even if they have a layer of copper over them. So if you have a 43 cent, and you're wondering if it's the copper example or the steel example, all you have to do is hold it next to a magnet. If it's attracted to the magnet, it's a regular steel 1943 cent. How's that for an answer?
Excellent. That is a great trick. All right. Other than World War II and the steel pennies, have there been any other times that different metals were used?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the steel cents themselves, the story behind it is that they made 1943 cents out of steel to save copper for artillery shells that were used during the Second World War. And also in 1943 to 1945, they also made nickels. They used a little bit of silver in them. So those coins actually have silver in them because nickel was so very important to the war effort at that time. So that's another example where they changed the recipe of the coins to be able to help the war effort.
Okay, perfect. Well, Rod, this has just been fantastic. And this is a fun book. You saw some of the pages where you get to see the coin, and then you get little glimpses of what is going on in America and also the world. So fun one to check out. We've got a link in the chat for you. You can check that out. And you can learn more about the Money Museum at money.org. So take a look at that as well. We just want to remind you, of course, about History Camp America. That is coming up July 10th, and Father's Day is coming up, and what a perfect gift for Father's Day. You can register at historycamp.org/register, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Let me add something to that. So I had the opportunity to participate in one of the sessions and two of the tours, and tonight actually met with John Bell as we looked at the tour that had been put together, and it's so interesting. We start from the Wayside Inn and a marker that says George Washington passed this way en route to Cambridge to take over the Continental Army. We end at nightfall, looking over Boston from Dorchester Heights. So it is a great tour, and John's going to take you through each of the sites in Cambridge and Boston associated with George Washington, what he did there, why he was there, and so forth. And then I'll mention the other two just briefly, and I think we'll have previews of these in the coming days or weeks. One of them is Marilyn Roach, one of the nation's experts on the Salem witch trials, and she talks about a number of kind of myths and so forth associated with those, and some of her research. And then the other is Judy Anderson, just a great architectural historian, taking us through Marblehead, which was a really important port city during the Revolutionary period that played a big role in the Revolution. In fact, the men from Marblehead rode Washington across the Delaware and also helped him escape from New York. Really fascinating, such an interesting community. So that's three of the talks, and that's three of the 35 that will be part of History Camp on July 10. So we definitely hope you join us.
Yes, and we are announcing the names of the speakers and the talks right now. We released the first batch yesterday, another batch today. So watch our social media and you'll keep seeing more and more information as we go. All right, next week we have Scott Kirchner with us, and he is going to be talking about innovation in New England up through about the early 1900s. So he's got some entertaining stories to share and some things that you probably have not heard before. So tune in for that and have a good night tonight. Thank you.
Good night.